Hello and welcome to the SCs, a script conversation, a podcast from the London Screenwriters Festival. I'm Helen Tompson, and this is a space where we can sit with the script itself and read it closely. We'll talk about what's going on directly on the page, because if you want to write, you have to read scripts properly and regularly, and as it's part of the job. So if you haven't read today's script, please pause here, go and find it and have a read, and then come back and listen to the episode. In each episode, I'll be joined by a guest to look at one script and explore how it works through structure, character, tone, and the choices that the writer is making and what we can learn from it as writers. Today, we're looking at Happy Valley, Series 1, Episode 1, written by Sally Wainwright, and I'm joined today by Lisa Holdsworth.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. So lovely to read this script again. It's aged extremely well.
Lisa, do you want to give us a very brief background on who you are as a writer?
So I'm a Yorkshire-based writer, which is very much my connection with this. I know the Happy Valley very well. Lived in Halifax for a little while, but I am Leeds-based. Now, I'm a massive fan of Sally Wainwright. Have been from Scott and Bailey onwards. I think she's one of our most extraordinary writers. And I am myself a television writer, and I've been for the last 25 years working on shows like Call the Midwife and Robin Hood, Midsummer Murders, and I've had my own series in the last year on Channel 4 called Dreamers.
Congratulations. So you're no one more qualified to have a look at the script than you, which is great. So just coming back to the script this time, because you mentioned that it was lovely to reread it. What struck you about the script?
How fast it gets moving. I think it was definitely the first time I saw the episode, I felt the same way, that there was very little setup. We're straight into Catherine's world very quickly, and our big bad, even though she plays a trick on us, and we meet him before we realise who he is, but we know who Tommy is pretty much by the end of page 10, start of page 11.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting how we build up that character, because we don't really fully know who he is until, we can't put the face to the name until quite later on into I think we're almost in Act 2, near the end of Act 2, I think. We see him. So but all of the exposition we've had about him has built this picture up.
We're left in no doubt that he's a bad man, but actually what struck me reading the script this time, everybody talks about that opening scene with the sunglasses and the fire extinguisher, but actually, and it made me cry reading it, the scene where Catherine's talking to the headmistress and finally telling the headmistress basically Ryan's backstory, his origin story, that is a child who's been conceived through a rape, and it's incredibly economical. It's a monologue, but still, again, we through how Catherine stops and starts, what she does say and what she doesn't say, we're left in no doubt that this is a very bad man. And then it's confirmed to us when we see how he treats Anne after the kidnap as well.
What really struck me reading this script and then going back and rewatching the episode was how drawn out on the paper, on the page, how drawn out that scene is. And it's sort of 6 pages before, as that scene, which when you go by page a minute standard, that feels like a long scene. But of course, on screen, it is less than 2.5 minutes. It's very, very quick. And I was curious about your take on how the writer here has taken a bold step, really, to make a scene appear that long versus how quickly it's shot, and just what you take away from that for writers.
I think it's a very confident writer, and Sally Wainwright has every right to be a confident writer. She's extraordinary, but the confidence of also that every single line of both action and dialogue is working. So the Greek chorus of locals is telling us what the area is like, the relationship with the other police officer, they're understanding that even though head office is saying they're sending someone along, they're going to get caught on the A58 and they're not going to get there in time. All that stuff is every beat of it is working hard. So I really hope that Sally didn't have to convince anybody that she needed those full six pages. But if she did, then I think she would have pointed to it and said, "Tell me where's the fat, where's the spare fletch on this?" Because there isn't any. It's working really hard, and it's funny, and it's dramatic, and she's done that brilliant thing of, you know, a lesser writer would have written the jeopardy of a bloke soaked in petrol with a cigarette lighter in his hand. You know, much darker, much more terrifying. They would have been, you know, I think cheap in the way they handled it. But Sally doesn't. She knows how we need to feel about Catherine. She needs to seem competent. She says it. She's competent and calm. And this is who I'd want talking me down if I was feeling suicidal as well. So it's again, it blew me away reading it this time. It's extraordinary.
And what would your advice be for new writers who want to tackle a scene where there's quite a lot going on in that opener of their show or their film, where perhaps the temptation might be to do dual dialogue lines to demonstrate that, you know, this is a layered exchange? What would your advice be?
I mean, Sally does use some dual dialogue there, but actually it's characters that are interacting with each other. She's not overlapping the scenes, and she's almost editing it on the page, which is now we go back to, she says, we go back to Catherine, we go back to this. You know, she knows she's writing with a very great sense of television because she directs as well as she writes, and that she knows, and I'm going to cut to, at this point, Kirsty going and talking to these youths. I'm going to cut back to Catherine. So she's almost doing a little bit of editing on the page, where she's delineating between things. So actually, if you were a very new writer and you were nervous about it, you could break it down into scenes. You could put a cut to between the different aspects of that scene. Sally doesn't need to, because she's going to be in control of it. But you be aware of where you want the camera to be pointing at time, where the focus and whose point of view we're seeing things from in the different moments of the scene, because it can switch.
Yeah. It really strikes you when you read it on the page, doesn't it? And it flows so well that you're just straight into the story and the character. And I think there were two things that really struck me about the introduction of Catherine here, in that you've got, in the very opening action lines, you've got all these active verbs that tell us about how she behaves and what kind of person she is. And then on page 2, we actually get some exposition from her about a little bit about herself and her relationship with her sister and what's going on at home. And I think there's a fine line, isn't there, between delivering that exposition and delivering it in a way that's engaging and justified. And I think Sally has done a really good job of doing that.
I mean, it's the off-quoted line, isn't it? Which, you know, I've got 2 grown-up kids, one dead, t'other's not talking to me. It's, you know, I think it was in the trailers as well. It is a fantastic, you know, opening introduction to that situation. But again, it's situational. It's why she's doing it. She's not just doing it because she needs an information dump. She's doing it to get the guy's confidence and to distract him, because the first thing he says is, why aren't he talking to you? That's another story, which is again a brilliant throwaway line. She's got his attention, so she's making it work hard, that little bit of exposition, in that, yeah, she's dropping that on us, but in the midst of chaos and things that are going on. And so it's not just, you know, again, a lesser actor might have put it in voiceover as she was driving across the Yorkshire moors in her police car or something like that. And when I say lesser, that might be my route one. That might be the thing I thought, I need to drop this in. But it was brilliant, because she's also telling it to a stranger, someone who doesn't know. Where exposition is awful is when people are telling each other things you think, well, they'd already know that. She'd come on and said it to her sister, or you know, someone, one of her colleagues. You get the feeling they probably know that. And it's interesting, again, coming back to that scene with the headmistress, she maps out in the stage directions how much the headmistress knows about this story. Because again, she's considered how much would she actually know? She's heard the rumors. But now Catherine's filling her in on the absolute truth of Ryan's birth. And again, that's really clever. She's thinking about every aspect of every character. So no character is just a cipher where I'm just going to download this at you. I'm just going to say this to you because you're useful. You're a non-playing character. Everybody's got a role in it. So and the fact that we get a call back to what happened to the guy who wanted to set himself on fire, and now he's accusing her later on of police brutality because she covered him in foam. Brilliant. Just that 360 thinking about scripts and character is again why she's an extraordinary writer.
Everything sort of does seem to come full circle with her writing, which is really lovely and layered. And I think something that was really, really good about the way that we spent so much time understanding why she hates Tommy, why she doesn't like him, and then what kind of person he is, so that when she does see him in Act 3, there's no dialogue there. It's all really captured in so reaction, and it makes it so much more emotional, I think, than any kind of adore him or any of that discussion. It's really powerful, that scene. Me feel for her when she.
It's so clever because it's cluing us in the minute he's called Tommy up at the caravan site. As I remember my heart going, oh no, he's back, because obviously there's been that discussion with Richard about maybe he's moved out of the area, he's given his mother's address as his bail as part of his probation conditions, but hopefully he's not here. And you can hear it in Richard. Richard really doesn't want her to seek him out or look for him. And so as an audience, we know something she doesn't. We also know what he's getting involved in. And it is a most extraordinary first episode, because by the end, we are begging Catherine to get involved with Tommy because he's doing such a terrible thing.
Yes, and you don't even question when she's lying in bed with Richard, questioning, what she would be like to act her revenge. You're like, yes, that's what I want for her as well. Oh yeah, it's really, really clever at pulling those emotional heartstrings, and she does that very well across lots of her shows, if not all.
And again, that 360 thinking, knowing what happens when she finally does confront Tommy the first time, and how brutal that's going to be. The setting up of, God, yeah, you do want her to bury him in a shallow grave in the moors. He's a terrible human being, but that's not the way it goes. That's not the way it goes with violent men. And again, spoiler for anybody who has not. Why haven't you watched the full series? That would be my first question. The decision she makes in the final episode of the first series, and then again call back to the final episode of the third series. I'm gonna have to go back and watch it all again now. It's just utterly brilliant. I don't know a writer with that grasp on their character and that understanding of poetic, it's poetic justice and truth that's shot through that work.
Yeah, it's very, very, very well considered, I think, and that leads us perfectly into thinking about how Sally has tackled the different the story threads that are going on here, because Catherine, in her workday and her family life and everything with Tommy, is just one arc that happens across the whole series. But there's also the conflict that happens with Kevin, who's sort of a repressed, downtrodden worker who has been his legacy's been stolen from him, and hatches a plan, or not only revenge, but a way to get the money that he needs to by setting up a kidnapping, which of course does involve Tommy. So it all comes full circle. But structurally, I think what surprised me was how structurally for this particular episode, when you look at inciting incident, midpoint, conflict, they are more related to Kevin than they are to Catherine. And to unpack that a bit with you, as a writer creating a TV series, creating that series arc and that episode arc, about the reasoning behind structuring it in that particular way.
I think it's unbelievably clever because, again, in a very basic thriller, you would set up Kevin from the off, and then you probably wouldn't meet Catherine until that encounter at the police station, Selby Bridge police station, where he's about to do the right. It's so clever. He's about to do the right thing, and he decides against it because he doesn't want to get himself in trouble. And what a brilliant moment in the first episode, that it could have all been avoided and sorted out, and probably would have got him a bit of trouble, but not a lot of trouble. And obviously, he just allows his bitterness to get in the way. And what an interesting contrast, just to go off topic a bit, interesting contrast in their characters. Him as the antagonist, he's had a pretty good hand. He lives in a fairly middle class house. It's, we're obviously supposed to consider that, with his wife being disabled, etc. But he has a place he can go on a weekend. It's all very nice, but he's still bitter. Whereas Catherine really has had a terrible hand dealt to her. She's lost her daughter, she's lost her marriage, etc. But she's trying to keep her spirits up. She's trying to be nice to Ryan, even though she's got that worries about him being dark. She goes up and reads him a story, even though she's exhausted. So that brilliant mirroring of those two characters that have had tough things happen, but not that, for him, not that tough. It's glorious. But yeah, we would have spent loads of time with him looking in bathroom windows and window mirrors and considering what he'd done and all the rest of it. But again, she's so economical in that storytelling. He needs the money, he sees the opportunity, and he does something so incredibly stupid and sets something off that he has no control over. And the minute we see the other character who's getting involved with, he's out of his depth. And it's so extraordinary. You do feel a bit sorry for Kevin. He's an idiot.
Yeah, especially
and he should have.
He behaves. He does something. He does something wrong, which is almost like the opposite, isn't it? Of the achieving your need, you get your want. But in this case, he kind of gets what he wants because he does something wrong. He sets up this kit thing, and he goes into work, and he gets the offer of what he wanted in the first place.
Yes, this is a. So, I mean, that's a brilliantly clever twist as well. That if he just waited 24 hours, if he hadn't been so nasty and bitter, then he would have got everything he ever wanted. And yeah, that's extraordinary.
So I mean, without giving away too many spoilers for the next episode, but also not delving into it because we're focusing on this particular pilot, being able to set up this as, I guess, the A story. So Kevin's journey in this particular episode is the A story. At around page 45, 46, which is quite a significant moment, that's where Catherine is lying in bed with Richard, and she's talking about what it would be like to meet Tommy, and that active question of, don't you want to know what it would be like, tells you, especially when Richard's like, you're not going to go looking for him, and that she is. That she is going to go looking for him, or that she's not going to not look for him. So that this is going to take you through to the next episode. So would you say that point at the beginning of the third act is roughly where you'd want to put your book for the rest of the series or the next episode? Or is that something that you could be a bit more fluid about? Because I think the instinct is probably to leave it till, the last few pages.
That's a good question. Because it's, again, without giving too many spoilers for the second episode, actually the way there's an official way for her to go about her business of looking for Tommy. Tommy puts himself in her world ultimately, and not she doesn't seek him. She's heads on the swivel, and he says in the stage directions when she sees him outside the Chinese takeaway, it's just because she's doing her job as a police officer, and she spots him and she pulls the car over. She shouldn't throw the brakes on. She doesn't do a 360 spin or nearly run a bus off the road because she's desperate to get to him. She does it all by the book. And so when she's fantasizing in that very weird pillow talk with Richard, I don't think we're supposed to think that's her genuine feeling. I think it's a longing for some sort of justice, and maybe she's going to have to take it in hand. And it's interesting how passive Richard is. You can almost hear the argument that split them up, and now he packed his bags in those moments, even though they're in bed together again. The love's there, but he's so passive and so won't do anything that that's where her fantasy lies. I think it's interesting. That complexity of character is brought through there, and I think and also because of how that first episode ends, because it ends with such brutality from Tommy, even if she did, hand her badge in and do something horribly cliched to hunt him down as a vigilante, again, she'd be justified. We know she'd be justified, but again, she doesn't do that. She stays within the constraints of her position as a police sergeant, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. So all of her actions are very justified, aren't they? And because they're, I suppose, her being so good at her job, which is it comes across very clearly in that opening scene. She's very competent at her job. And she knows it inside out. She knows she's on her own in that moment with the man up petrol. That I guess she would have to go through some sort of evolution to really push against that part of herself.
And again, I think there's a parallel universe version of this where, again, not wanting to spoil the end of the series for anybody who's seen it, but you're an idiot if you've not seen it. Where she does get an opportunity to take some justice into her hands. She does have a chance to end Tommy, which would have been a tragedy because then we wouldn't have had Happy Valley 2 and 3. But and she doesn't take. I think when she voices that to Richard, it is. I think if he'd have reacted more strongly, if he'd have said, "Yeah, I'll dig the hole for you, I'll help you," then maybe that'd be a completely different series. But the fact that he does sort of say, you really, that's a dark place to go. Don't go there. He is a sort of Jiminy Cricket on her shoulder at that point, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Even though we're frustrated with, I think we would have been cheering if Tommy had ended up in a shallow grave at the end of the first series.
But those secondary character relationships are really important at being able to provide the options for those characters to make those decisions, your protagonist to make those decisions. And even though the role of Claire and the role of Richard are more or less doing the same thing, they're doing it from such different perspectives that it feels like they're offering something very different when they say, no, you really should just kind of like let go of it and move on and, don't chase down that rabbit hole. But especially thinking about the way Claire is very much, I'm trying to protect you. And Richard is very much, I'm trying to move on. Let's forget this. And I think being able to use those two characters in that way, but have them come at it from different angles, really also helps flesh out Catherine as a character to show that she's got multiple dimensions, but also has different needs as well. She doesn't just need to be pacified. She needs to be loved by her sister and helped through this situation, not just pacified like Richard is trying to do.
You sort of went out in the middle of that question, so probably pick up from there.
Yeah, so I was talking about the secondary characters and the relationship that Claire and Richard both have with Catherine, and how they are effectively doing the same thing, but they are provided in different angles. So Claire her purpose is really about care and support, and you can see the concern that she has for her sister. Whereas Richard very much, I want to kind of bury this and let's move on. I don't want to think about this anymore, and this isn't healthy. So it's very interesting how Sally Wainwright has used these two characters to enrich Catherine as a character herself, and give us a multiple dimension and show us that she has different needs, and that different people provide that support. So I just think it's really clever how we've got the use of these two characters in that way.
I think it's certainly on gender lines, because Claire, I think throughout the series, you don't see that much of this is the support, the physical support. I'm making pizzas. I'll look after him tonight. No judgment about her sleeping with Richard. She can tell, she knows what's going on there. Is there that very female energy of I'll tell you the truth when you need it, but I'll also listen when you don't need me to talk. Whereas Richard, ultimately, because he's cheating on his on the woman he left Catherine for, he talks about his own. But when Catherine's making it clear she doesn't really want to talk to him before we know that he's the ex, when he drops on, I'm about to get sacked and I need a story. He's a taker. Claire, I think, will have been in the past because of her heroin addiction, but she's a giver. She's trying to repay her debt to Catherine. So I think it's very interesting how that's split along the gendered line. The two people who probably know Catherine best, and as you find out in the second episode, her son as well, I think, has been a selfish little. So I remember very clearly thinking the first time I saw it, selfish little bugger. And so Catherine's dealing with some selfish men in her life.
Yes, she is. And it's certainly a theme that Sally is leaning into more and more with her writing, which is a real pleasure to engage with. Riot Women was definitely one of my highlights of last year of watching that. I loved that. So just sort of focusing a bit on Sally as a regional writer. So she really leans into the heritage of Yorkshire, as she has with Happy Valley, Last Hanger in Halifax, Riot Women, and many other things. And what struck me when I was reading the script, apart from maybe some of the dialects, the colloquisms and contractions, what I was wondering about with this particular script, and whether or not it holds a sense of place because of the story, or is the message really you can take this story and do it anywhere, but by doing it somewhere like Yorkshire, you're really giving an opportunity for representation and just to show us a different type of culture. And I was curious about your take on that, as you are from the region.
I am. I think what Sally does is she's very unromantic about Yorkshire. It's not the glorious moors or anything like. Even though when people watch her shows, when they're set in Yorkshire, they talk about how amazing the locations are, particularly on something like Last Tango in Halifax. But she's not romanticizing it in any way, shape, or form. It is a hilly, unhospitable, sometimes hard to get to places. Halifax, Hebden Bridge as well, and Sowerby Bridge is very difficult to drive around if you've ever had the misfortune to do that. And there are some incredibly rundown areas of it, which she, again, doesn't shy away of watching. This is not heritage television. It's not trying to be Wuthering Heights or anything like that. And, Yorkshire's incredibly fortunate in that it's portrayed on screen pretty much every night of the week. But go to Channel 5, it's All Creatures Great and Small, the Yorkshire Vet, Yorkshire this, Yorkshire that, etc. And most of it is how wonderfully lucky we are to live in God's own country, which I absolutely am. But also it has a dark side. And I think that's where Sally, again, it would have been really easy for her to write something pretty. She could have made Nevison own a hotel or something like that. He doesn't. In fact, I don't think he's defined what he does. It's an engineering company, and that's as much as we know. And there's lots of that industrial stuff around the Calder Valley, and so that's what makes her stand apart. She's not selling as Yorkshire in any way. She's telling it like it is.
Yeah, and that is an interesting shift when you think about some of the shows that they would do in places that are less traditionally filmed. And I know from living in the Southwest, there's a number of towns and villages that have the taint of perhaps being not as idyllic on one side and not so idyllic on the other, and temptation for most people is to show the best side, and things like this, and shows like The Responder, we're starting to see a slightly truer, more relatable side of things, which also highlights quite a lot of social need as well, and brings that into a conversation, which is very refreshing to see. And I hope that there's more of that. Is that if you think about like Last Tango in Halifax, that one probably was a little bit more chocolate box in comparison. So yeah, it's a very refreshing way of looking at it. But I guess often crime as a genre isn't going to always be this Poirot-esque or Marple sort of beautiful aesthetics. It is going to lend itself.
Yeah, and I think the BBC sold series 3 on this is not cozy crime, and it's not in any way, shape, or form. And there is, if you live in a place or a city, there is certainly for me a desire to show its best side and to say this is what there's a reason I've chosen to live here. And in fairness, I believe that Sally wasn't living in Halifax at the time she wrote series 1. I think she lives in Ripondon now, which is a part of the Calder Valley. But there's a sense of sometimes you can be accused of disloyalty if you're showing a side of a city that is definitely there, but we don't talk about it. So I think probably Aidan's representation of Bradford in Verdi, for example, was incredibly gritty, and I'm sure there were some people who were uncomfortable with it because you want the tourists to come and we're going to be City of Culture this year and all that kind of thing. So I cannot imagine Sally having any truck with that kind of chocolate box touristy kind of stuff. She's a dramatist, not the tourist board, that's for sure.
Well, I am all for it. I think it's very, very good to see these areas represented and the people that live in them every day and their lives represented, even if sometimes it's a bit extreme. But it's very refreshing, to say the least. Just before we sort of close off, I just wondered if there was any other thoughts that you had on this particular script, or anything that you wanted to point out, or any advice that you'd have for a writer who may be writing something in this vein, either regional or in the genre.
I think again, and I've been lucky enough to see Sally interviewed about her writing. She writes something that she believes in, that is her voice. She doesn't compromise on her voice whatsoever. Whether and she has written a range of stuff from. It's really worth seeking out Spark House, which was her modern day adaptation of Wuthering Heights. Much better, I would venture, than the current version of Wuthering Heights. Probably a bit more on point. She's done in the Bronte, she's done period drama with To Walk Invisible and Renegade Nell. But the things we love from her are her contemporary police dramas. But I think she's a masterclass because, and I'm sort of thinking about the first episode of Last Tango in Halifax, the way she gets those stories to motor. When you hear the pitch for Last Tango in Halifax, you expect it'll take about 3 episodes for the elderly couple at the heart of it to get round to getting married. It'll be that kind of thing. And they're virtually married by the end of the first episode. They're together. And so that instinct of, I would like to ask her, and she probably wouldn't answer, is, are there longer versions of this story where you start much, much earlier? And are you moving that into that's backstory? There could have been an amazing opening pre-title sequence in Happy Valley of Richard finding their daughter, of Tommy be going down for something else, not for his most hideous crimes. Those kind of things. She could have set it up like that, but she chose to just get into the present day. Let's get to the now. And I think for newer writers, and I've read lots of new writer scripts, and the note I invariably give is, you need to get into the story quicker. Just get there. to your inciting incident, get to the bit that's actually interesting, do the setup in amongst, and get cracking with the story. And I think there's no better example than Sally Wainwright's writing.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And, speaking of her voice, I picked out a line that I just absolutely loved. It's from scene 11. So we're sort of just in the beginning of Act 2, and she is having dinner with Richard. And it says here, Catherine remains preoccupied, but it hasn't affected her appetite. Perhaps she's wound up or upset. She eats more or faster. I would. And I just loved that. And I just thought, it's almost unfiltered. It's kind of, she's thinking as she's writing, but it's also, because I know that there's a lot, we're told a lot as new writers that you need to make sure that if you can't film it, don't put it in there. The temptation to take something like that out, I think, but of course this is her voice. So maybe Sally's got a bit of license at this point in her career to be able to write things like that in there. But it's also, okay, if I would, then I'm thinking, well, yeah, actually, maybe I agree with that. I would too. And it, instantly I can relate to the character and what she's feeling in that moment more. So I loved it.
I think one of the important things when you write is reading scripts is to see how it's a working document. So everything on there is helping whoever picks it, whether it is production design that knows they're going to have make some food that's edible because we're going to want to see her eat, but also for the actors to know. I'm giving you a bit of background so that your instinct might be to pick at your food because you're upset in this scene, but I don't want you to do that. I want you to do this. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to give you the information you need. So and absolutely don't fill your stage directions full of stuff that we don't need. But if thinking about it, the script as a working document and what the actor needs in that moment, again, she's kind of directing on the page because she might sit down, if someone else had directed those episodes, she might have sat down with them and said, this is why I want to eat quickly. Can you make sure that happens? And I think pretty much every writer who's ever had their work produced may have had the experience where she's written it and it's been ignored. And so she's making double plus positive that what she wants to see on that screen is going to end up there.
Yeah, that's really good. That's brilliant advice. Well, Lisa, thank you so much. I feel like we could have sat here unpicking all of Sally's work for hours. It's been such a rich conversation. Thank you very much. And I think
My absolute pleasure.
yeah, what really stays with me is just how much the script does through the behavior, the voice, and the specificity as well. And it really gets us on side very quickly without over explaining. It is a masterclass. You are right. So if you're listening as a writer, go back to the script and have a look again at those opening pages and the things that we've discussed. Look what's doing the work, what's working for all of us, and have a look at what you can learn from that particular script. And of course, have a look at some of the others as well that Sally has written. Thank you so much for listening to the SC from the London Screenwriters Festival. We'll be back with another script and another guest another time. See you then.